All right,
Ta-da.
here we go.
Yeah,
We're making it happen. Hi over
totally.
there.
Yeah, this is Sybil.
Oh, well, hello, Sybil. This is very on brand for you over there.
Yeah,
Oh
she's
my gosh. We are in Doug's office right now.
yes.
Doug Abel's world headquarters.
Yep. I'm in the North Pole, I think. Is that right?
Or good old Crescent Hill.
Oh,
Louisville.
one or the other. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I cannot thank you enough for joining us tonight.
Sure.
And here's hoping that I can pull this off without any technological issues. So far you can hear me and I can see you. And so
Yes. Yes.
all that.
So far, so good. Let's knock on wood. I'm knocking on wood. I think actually it's sort of a particle board, something or other, but
I was about to say, good thing my dog didn't bark in response to that.
oh, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
like
I know
kicking it
about
off
that.
with a bang.
Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
so, just to jump right in, so we have 60 minutes here, and we're going to have some filmmakers, film lovers pop in and ask you some questions, a little bit about your experiences, your craft. Of course, probably some questions about Tiger King as well.
Sure.
But I think to go ahead and get started, since we are the Louisville Film Society, you are here, you're creating your work out of Louisville. Tell me a little bit about what brought you to Louisville.
Sure. So I'm a native New Yorker. I was actually born in Manhattan, and so I think that makes me even a rarer bird to have a native Manhattanite move to Louisville. There's probably like a short list of those, but have been working in film since the early '90s, and we were there I am. We were looking for a place so I was living in upstate New York for a number of years. And so I was already kind of used to doing some remote working, schlepping back and forth. And this is very distracting seeing myself. How can I make myself not here? I don't know how to do that. Well, there's you. I don't know. Okay. That's the technological, because I'm seeing myself backwards. I'm like, wait, do I part my hair on that? What hair is left? Anyway, so we were looking for a place to move. We were thinking big city life is not us. My wife, Jenny Brown, who's the native Louisvillian, and we got married in 2004. And we were not into the big city of New York City. I had been there, done that, lived there for 30 years. It's not going anywhere. We're good. We liked the country life. We liked not living in a big city. And we were really thinking, well, maybe technology has gotten to the point where I could work remotely. And we were considering a couple options. We looked at Portland. We were thinking about maybe somewhere in Colorado. And then we thought, well, this is silly. We have family in Louisville, and it's not that far. And I hear a cat crying. The kittens. We'll get to the kittens later. And we thought, well, this is actually a smart thing. Let's go down there and rent a house and give it a try. And you know what you can't do in Louisville is rent a house when you have 3 dogs, one of whom is a pit bull. So we thought, well, you know what? Let's buy a house. People do it. Crazier things have happened. Hopefully Sybil doesn't step on the mouse. Hi.
The feed going.
So yeah, she's in here. And so it was kind of just one of those things where we're like, why not? Let's do it. And of course, my wife loves it here. And it gives her a warm fuzzy to, drive past. Oh, that used to be, oh, I'm glad that's still there. And so she hasn't been here for 20 something years. But it's nice to be with her family and give that a turn. So that's kind of the short version of how we ended up here.
So I know you were looking at other cities, and so no matter what, leaving New York was what was on the table. But being in Louisville, did you have any type of, kind of fear of being based here in the middle of the country versus on one of the coasts, or what? How did you feel about that? Were you all in the very beginning?
So there was definitely some trepidation. You have to be quite disciplined to work remotely. And I think probably by nature, I'm a little bit of a night owl. So even just working remotely, no matter where I was going to be was a little bit, let me see if maybe Say hi to everybody. Okay, we're going to
hello,
get off the
Sarah.
table now. Um, so that was no matter where we went. No, it didn't spook me that badly. What's great, if you're in this situation, is that the airport's so close and the flights aren't too bad. And in a bleeding emergency, you can even drive it. So if I did have some sort of family emergency, I could still, get home, and it wasn't like, I've done that drive, in one fell
One
swoop
painful day.
by myself. And so it was a little spooky, but at least, I knew first of all, I knew I was going to be working on Tiger King when I moved here. Like I literally so I knew I at least had like a stretch of time. At the time we thought it was 4 or 5 months where I would have gainful employment. And so it wasn't that scary for me. But it was, it was definitely a big decision, but we've moved around quite a bit, and we've had a couple of adventures and living different places. So it didn't spook me that much. And sometimes you just have to try stuff, and worst case scenarios is you made a mistake and you joke about it years later, but that's not the case here.
Oh yeah, well, I can remember meeting you at you and Jenny at one of the LFS socials at the back door, and just absolutely fell in love. And then, you're very humble about your career, your
Correct.
storied career. So it's really, I love Jenny, who's like, yeah, by the way, he edited Fog of War, the Academy
I know.
Award winning.
My role is to stand there looking uncomfortable while she does that. So
Well, she does the PR march for you.
she
'Cause
does. That's true.
whoa.
I just turned into a statue.
Your background from, again, Academy Award winning films to series sitcoms, to concert films, to this docu-series that now everyone and their mother has seen. I think it was 5 billion streaming minutes of the film has been seen. I mean, like, that's a pretty incredible breadth of time and sharing that your work has seen. So tell me a little bit about how you can focus on so many different types of projects and do such an incredible job. Is there a different type of style or way that you go into each different type of film?
My main approach is getting paid. So that part, that's a good motivation.
Yeah.
That helps a lot. Well, first of all, I think I might have it in my blood. My dad was a book editor and a writer. And so, you're telling stories, the job of the editor is you're, especially in documentaries, is that's an important part of telling these stories. So I think maybe I had a genetic predisposition to being in this field. But I have been making films since I was a little kid. So for me, it was more like, oh my God, you can get paid to do this? This is cool.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I might have ended up being a camera person or being a producer or any of a variety of other roles, because I was really interested in it all. But when I graduated in college in 1989, I was working as I was working on, at the time, all these low budget features in New York City. They would shoot in the middle of winter because the equipment was really cheap. And because it was like equipment was like the big deal to rent that. And I just remember being at a gas station, an abandoned gas station, filming this like low budget feature, and it was running sound, and it was like 2 a.m, and it was bitterly cold. And I just remember, like holding the boom and thinking like, if I were an editor, there'd be like a ceiling, and there'd be walls, there'd be a bathroom, and I could drink coffee. And so part of it was kind of like, I just sort of realized maybe the sort of the sexy part of being out on location maybe wasn't really my speed. And so I think I gravitated towards that. And I did work in as like a footage researcher. I worked in the world of that's where a lot of the jobs are in New York City. And so I did work as like an associate producer, and I did footage research for this show called American Justice. You have to say it close to the mic when you say that. And so I learned just a lot about light. I mean, I wore so many hats, plus I was a PA, and I would run around. I've totally strayed from your question, by the way, I'm realizing, but that's okay. That's okay. Yeah. And so I think to answer your question, it's like you just sort of fall into these different positions. And yes, I mean, the concert film was a Metallica, but it was really more of a behind the scenes documentary. I mean, it did have a lot of music in it, just obviously because of what it was. But I got into that because a friend of mine, David Zief, had been working on it for a bit of time, and he was somebody I knew from Michael Moore days. And it is sort of who and who you can get along with. And I always joke that being an editor is roughly 30% talent and 70% good hygiene. And so because it's
Really true. That's frightening. Now
yeah,
that you say that,
that
that's
ratio.
accurate.
I changed that ratio, by the way, as I get a little older. I'm cleaner now. So it's good. 60 to 70% is good.
Yeah.
But so you just kind of just figure it out as you go in terms of what kind of project. But I definitely had a predisposition to doing to anything where I had to create a story or anything funny. I was born also with a good sense of humor, and I really liked working on comedy stuff, and was very lucky to stumble into the ill-fated Dana Carvey show in the late 90s. But I met, Steve Colbert was on it, Steve Carell, Louis C.K. I mean, all these amazing people were just like cast members on that show. So I got to meet all of these amazing comedy people. And that's really what helped me get a lot of this comedy work. So just life is weird, and that's kind of how it unfolded for me. So
that's a lot of times I call it like the Tarzan effect, where it's like you're on one vine and it like just shoots you through the jungle, and you're like, okay, wait, here's the next gig, and on to the next, just from connecting to different people from one gig. It helps you to move on to the next. So that being said, about Tiger King, you said that was something you had imagined 4 or 5 months working on it. And that was a few years ago. So how did you meet that team? How did that come to be, and then eventually grow into the larger project?
Right. So when we were living in upstate New York, in Woodstock, my wife and I were running a sanctuary for farm animals. So it turns out that one of the producers on Tiger King also has a second home in Woodstock, and she had actually been. This is Rebecca Chaiklin. So she had actually been and actually had met me in a totally different context prior to that project even happening. She just had brought her kids there, and and had pet the chickens and the cows and all that stuff. So she had approached me because the project was really, it's about tigers, it's about animals. I'm going to see if I can get her off my lap again. It's a fun game. And so it seemed like a natural fit. I'm a guy who can do sort of funny, quirky stuff. I've done documentaries. I've done large documentaries. I love animals and advocating for them. And so, initially it was a much smaller project in scope, and it was going to be not just about tigers. It was about just sort of animals in general and how they're used and abused in a variety of different ways. There was going to be something about reptile smuggling, and so it had gone through a number of different incarnations. But originally, I was hired to basically work on what's called a sizzle reel, which is what can be anywhere from a 6 to 20-minute little demo of what you think this might be. And so they had done quite a bit of filming already, and so we had enough stuff to kind of put it together. But this project had so many starts and stops, it's kind of crazy. So that was back in 2016, and I worked on it for a couple months, and then I think I went off and did another project. I worked on the first part of Michael Moore's Fahrenheit 11/9 film. And then that went on a hiatus right around the time that the Weinstein crisis happened. And because the Weinstein brothers were actually funding the film. And Michael, once all those revelations came out about Harvey, he didn't want to have anything to do with their money. And so he put the whole project on hiatus, and that created another opening. And so then all of a sudden, I was back on the Tiger Project. And I think that was around the time that we thought, well, maybe CNN had passed on doing a series, and we thought, well, maybe we can do a feature film. And so we worked on that for quite a bit of time, and got to a point where we were like, well, this is pretty good, but there's so much that we don't know. And so they were going to go off and do some more filming. And then I worked on the second part of the Michael Moore project. And while that was happening, they were doing more and more filming, and more parts of the story were coming together. And so by the time the Michael Moore thing finished, 2 days before I moved to Louisville, the producers were anxious to have me back on the project, and they had all sorts of ideas. And at that point, they were thinking that it should be like a 2 or 3 part series. So, it kind of then evolved from that. The story kept happening. They were filming it, as stuff was happening. And the best way I can describe it is it's like building the airplane while you are flying it. And so from an editor's point of view, it was really tricky because you are trying to form stories and figure out, the through lines, but then something dramatic will happen and everything changes. And one story I've told a couple times is I was going back and forth. I was working here, and then I'd fly to New York, and it was a different experience whether I was working with the whole team or working by myself. But sometimes when I was in New York, I would get delayed on the train or whatever, and I'd come in and everybody would be crowded around a conference table, and I'd say, oh God, what happened? And there'd be some new development with Joe or something that completely changed the track of it. So it just kind of kept growing and growing and growing. And then we thought, well, maybe we could do 5 episodes, and then it grew to 6. And then we realized the last episode had enough in it that it could be split in 2. So, okay, I can not hear you. I can see you though. Do you know American Sign Language? Okay, you're back.
Hi.
Okay.
That was interesting. Here we go.
Okay. Was I on, or was I just kind of
Back
talking
at
to myself?
it. No, you were good. Everything.
Okay.
Just tiny issue right here. Did you do some tap dancing while I was gone?
No, I just kept talking because you wind me up. There's actually a string in the back of my back. You just pull that.
That's my guy.
It's usually good for about 2 minutes of just prattling on about what happened.
Thank you. And I'm really glad that there was no audio going on over here, because the language that was happening was not really suitable for that.
I understand. PG-13.
Yeah, exactly.
So I fully answered and brilliantly answered your question to your absolute satisfaction.
I'm sure it was absolutely brilliant. You know what? I think that what that was a sign for is that we're going to go ahead and pass this over to some filmmakers and film lovers who are on this Zoom with us, who have some questions for you.
All right.
So I am going to see, okay, I do not see Jenny Riddit. If you are on here, if you will wave. If not, let me see if Jeff is on here. We have, and then Ben, I'm going to go ahead and come to you so you can ask your question. Come on over, Ben. Unmute. And then Ben, if you want to cue your video, there you are. Hi.
There's Ben.
Hello.
Greetings.
Greetings. Thank you for answering my question. When you are working on projects that are years in the making, there must be a lot of footage to work through and give shape to. And you've talked a little bit about how Tiger King developed. I was wondering if you can talk about some other versions of the story that you can imagine telling, for example, the arc of participant stories or the documentary's thesis more generally.
I'm sorry, can you ask the question again? I'm not sure if I totally followed you there.
Sure. Basically, with all the footage that you're getting over the years, I'd be really interested to know if you imagined telling the story in any other different ways, be that individual participants or the thesis of the documentary more generally. Do
you mean with this particular project, or just is that the general?
You would with Tiger King would be particularly interesting for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. To be honest, it wasn't like we debated different ways to tell the story. We were just struggling with the story, period. And so we were thrilled that it did start to come together after a certain point. I mean, Joe is, for better or worse, Joe is the through line. And that was mostly a function of the fact that we had done so much filming with him. And he also had an archive, this ridiculous archive of footage. And so we had things that even I don't think he realized were on tape. And so the way it kind of because let's be honest, not a whole lot actually happens in the series. Like there've been, you know, funny memes about how basically, you know, there's a couple things that happen, you know. There was a lawsuit, there was some ugliness, and then Joe, you know, hired somebody to kill Carol. I mean, it's like in terms of actual plot points, it's not a whole lot to hang your hat on and stretch out to 7 episodes. And so what it really became is kind of this a bit more of like a character study. And it did really start out much more about, you know, the animals per se. And part of the problem that we ran into is that unlike a lot of other, like, you know, for example, with Blackfish, where you really get to know the whales, we didn't have a way that we could get to know a tiger and see a tiger go through a process. They were being, you know, kind of cycled through the system so quickly, and we just didn't have that kind of access. And so we found that we were focusing more on the folks, the people who were in it. And so that was one kind of revelation, is that we realized that we want to get these really important ideas across about tigers, but that what's probably going to keep people tied in is of course the people. And because the plot is so odd, we really did like a deep dive into each person. And it was Chris Smith came along as a producer relatively late in the project, I think in the last year. And Chris had a really great piece of advice, which is that he said, you need to go and you need to do an interview with a person. Even if you've done 5 interviews already, do one more and have this be like the Bible of the interview. And he would do these 4 or 5 hour long deep dive. Tell me, you know, start when you were a tadpole and take me to the last 2 minutes. And so we ended up doing like these incredibly, you know, basically getting all these details about everybody's lives. And then in terms of structuring it, it just has this, I mean, it has a pretty bizarre structure where all of a sudden you go off and you do, it becomes kind of this true crime drama in the middle of it. And it's, I think that's part of what keeps people interested in the project, is that it's so oddball. It doesn't really have like a structure that you can actually kind of wrap your head around. And that wasn't like particularly by design, but it actually worked out that way. And we realized, yeah, this sort of works. You can just kind of, once you sort of feel like you're exhausting the possibilities with these, you know, this conflict, you know, this lawsuit, enter Jeff Lowe, and it's like, oh, here's some new stuff that's going to go down. And so I wouldn't say that we had the luxury of doing a tremendous amount of experimenting with the structure. It was really, because it was so happening in the moment, we were really just kind of trying to figure out how to build the blocks, and also build the blocks in such a way for a couple different scenarios. Like, what if Joe got off at court? You know, we didn't know. We were filming and cutting. What if Joe gets 99 years in jail? You know, he didn't get sentenced until we were completely done, almost like color correct and audio and everything. So I would basically say we weren't able to do kind of what you were asking about, which is really experiment with and consider a lot of different possibilities. It was really just kind of more just dealing with the chaos that was in front of us.
Right. Thank you. Thanks for joining us, Ben.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
All right, so I am going to bring on Richard Van Cleek, who has a question for you. Let's see where you are on here, Richard. 1 second. I think this is you. We might have a surprise. The name is a little different, but I believe this is somewhat along the same lines. Let me go ahead and unmute you. And
yes, I don't know if you can see me, but
let's see, I'm asking to start video.
Do I need to hit start video? Okay, there we go.
Yes.
Yes.
There he is. Hey, Richard.
Hello.
So I know yours is a little bit along the same lines, but
yes, Doug, thank you for sharing this time with us.
Of course.
My question was, it's maybe in general, but in specifically with Tiger King, I was wondering how you went about balancing time and pacing with this insane cast of characters that, I mean, if they had been written in a script, you would say overwritten, impossible. It couldn't be that many, crazy different people. And I'm wondering how you dealt with that, and if there was some evolution that occurred while you were in the editing process with so many different characters that were just fairly outrageous.
Yeah, so it's a good question. Thank you. And I should also say that I was not the only editor on the film. I did work on it, I think the longest, but there were a total of 7 people who had their mitts on it at various parts, and 4 in particular who were really crunching on it. But to answer your question, one thing we discovered is that different people had introduced different energy. And so some folks, like Carol Baskin she's very soft-spoken, and she's very sort of serious, even though she has kind of a quirky side. So we had trouble sometimes. And another thing that happened with Carol is that at a certain point, she had her husband Howard do a lot of the talking. And so if you notice in the series, he becomes a bigger presence as it goes along, inherently, because he started doing a lot more of the talking. So you're right. There were certain people, like when Doc Antle would enter the screen and he'd say whatever he comes out of that guy's mouth is going to be outrageous. Joe, by and large, anything that comes out of his mouth is going to be crazy and outrageous. A guy like Jeff Lowe, he's another soft-spoken kind of low energy guy. And so you're definitely identifying something that we struggled with, that we noticed, that as important as it was to keep certain people alive, there are episodes where Carol and Howard really aren't in it very much, because once we get into the craziness behind the scenes with Jeff and Joe, we're not really telling that part of the story. And so, but we needed to keep them alive. And so, maybe a poor choice of words, to keep them in the story. And so it was really challenging to balance that. And Joe he's so crazy that he can kind of wash over and overwhelm things. And he also has he's we were trying to figure out, Joe we're in this sort of world where everybody likes to watch things that have anti-heroes, and I think Joe is the ultimate anti-hero. Joe is a bad person. I mean, I think we can say that with with no issue there. Joe's a bad guy. He did bad things to animals. However, he's a very quirky, obviously, charismatic guy. And so we wanted to be careful that we structured it in such a way that, at least in the beginning, we shied away from some of his really aggressive, really hateful stuff, because we did kind of want people to buy into, all right, well, why should I watch another episode of this? And so we did kind of do a little pivot a bit into the series, where that's when you start to kind of reveal some of the more awful stuff that he did, and just how, his, perhaps violent side with this potential murder for hire. Spoiler alert. And so you're basically identifying, and I'm basically saying, yes, that was a problem. And the way I think we dealt with it it was just the old-fashioned trial and error. And we would have these group screenings, and people would say, God, I really miss, Doc Antle's energy. And you'll notice Doc is inserted in strange little spots. One of the things we also had the luxury of doing is that we were filming multiple interviews. So Eric Good would go down, or sometimes it would be Rebecca would go down and film, and they would say, anything you want Doc to say, we can ask him about it, or anything you want, Jeff Lowe to say. So we were able to kind of inject the characters in spots where they hadn't been, because there was so much ongoing filming going on. And we had every reason to be filming continuously, because, as I said, the story was changing so rapidly that it was a natural thing as filmmakers. Yes, of course, we need to go and talk to Doc again. There were some certain people would sometimes go dark on us, like Mario, the guy. He sort of disappears in the series, and that's because he just said, you know what, I don't see a good side to this, so I'm going to just not participate. And he more or less disappeared from the series. We kept him in because we just found him kind of interesting, and people just really were somehow drawn to this crazy guy who was an ex, drug dealer, convict, chainsawed people apart, and somehow now is running a zoo. So we did keep him in, which was very controversial. We was back and forth with that. So I hope I answered your question. It would be basically blood, sweat, and tears is the answer of how we did that.
Thank you. I appreciate
Sure.
it.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So a question I have to kind of pop in on top of what we're talking about with Tiger King is, where did Netflix come in along the way, and were they a catalyst for any of the changing of the story or the pacing or the fact it's a docu-series versus was it ever going to be just a one feature length doc? How did the intentions or the project change when Netflix got involved?
Right. So Netflix got involved. I think they started to become like an actual possibility around this time last year. And Chris Smith, fairly late in the process. And Chris Smith also had a good relationship with them because he had just gotten off the big Fire documentary about the crazy music festival, and he has done some other projects with them. So Chris was also sort of brought in is to sort of help us, like, how can we tailor this a little bit towards Netflix, since he was pretty experienced. And I don't think I'm going to surprise anybody to say that Netflix it's an entertainment network. It's not Discovery Channel or the BBC. So some of the stuff that we had about the plight of the tigers, there was some really like messed up, sad stuff, and they were pretty much a broken record in saying that, look, we don't want this to be a puff piece. We do want to tackle some serious issues, but animal cruelty is one thing that people they'll just turn off the TV at that point. And so that was a bit of a struggle because it was something that we all felt was important. But we also had to kind of go with, they actually, I think, bought the project about like last summer. I want to say like July or August. I mean, it was, maybe I'm a little off on that, but it was around then. It wasn't that long ago.
Mm-hmm.
And once they were on, it was sort of like, well, we have to kind of, we're now doing a Netflix show. And they did buy into a number of episodes. I believe we proposed 5, and then as things progressed, we slowly grew to 7. But those were the things that they kind of interjected most. Were they really wanted us to be careful about a lot of the animal cruelty stuff because they felt that it would turn off viewers, but they felt that if we were artistic about it, that we could still get the message across and get people to watch it was the goal. They also really wanted to try to make sure that we had effective, cliffhangers, if you will. I'm not really sure why they care that people binge, but I guess when people are binging, they're not, losing track of stuff and then, not tuning in and losing track of it. I think, and then they are able to overwhelm their competitors if everyone's binge watching Netflix. So that seems to be something they like when people do. And so, that was something that they kind of definitely were focused on, is like making sure that there's like enough of a thing that makes you want to watch more.
Did they kind of coach you in a way of like what makes a Netflix docuseries versus what you were originally starting?
Yeah, I mean, they want to be a filmmaker friendly network, but that said, they're very good. I mean, they do there's a number of executives there they're very smart people, and another thing they had us do is they had us whittle down. I mean, it's hard to believe that this is true, but to whittle down as few characters as possible. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of people that we had in there. There's a really amazing scene that unfortunately didn't get in, but it's a scene where a guy who appears nowhere else in the series, but he told this amazing story about how Joe was trying to steal some cubs from a mama tiger, and she just didn't want to give up the cubs. And he went in there with water guns and fire extinguishers and all of these. It's a really heart-wrenching story. Unfortunately, Netflix pointed out, you don't really listen to the story because you're wondering, wait, who's this guy that all of a sudden is telling the story, his total third person? So they really had us, where possible, try to get our main characters, and you'll see that we use we use Rinky as sort of a Greek chorus, and Rick Kirkham, who was filmed quite late in the process, around this time last year. So they became kind of our storytellers in lieu of maybe a person who might just chime in for 10 minutes, just on a short little section and never appear again. So they do have an aesthetic where they like to say, like, let's get to know our cast of characters and let them tell the story. And sometimes that meant you might have a great aspect, but it was just weird to all of a sudden, when we're focusing on these 8 or 9 or 10 people, to have like this other person just sort of pop in. So we did try to minimize those. So that was another thing. And it was frustrating for me as an editor, because it's like, oh, but this is a great scene and we could figure out a way to do it.
Yeah, and it helped to build that other side of the story that was kind of part of the original intention, but now that's been stripped down because of who the storyteller is.
But it was something, that they kind of, like, with their sort of idea of a premium doc, I think they felt that makes it seem like a cheaper documentary. And if you watch their stuff, it is kind of, that is the kind of aesthetic, is that you do tend to kind of minimize it to a core, you think about like Wild Wild Country. I mean, there were a lot of characters in that, but you do sort of return to the same sort of, Greek chorus of people. So they definitely shaped it quite a bit. That
does make a lot of sense, because I know sometimes in a documentary, it can be very distracting when all of a sudden you're like, wait, who's this guy? I mean, that's a fascinating fact, but like, who is that guy? And then it becomes more of a distraction of trying to figure out why this random just came in to tell us something.
Unless that's the style of the documentary, that you just keep seeing random people and then you get used to it. But we weren't really doing that. We were really kind of doing a deep dive into characters. So
I like that. So that actually kind of segues to Sarah Bossler has a question a little bit about how the documentary turned out. So let's go ahead and bring her on. All right. Unmute you. There she is.
Hello.
Hey, Sarah. Thanks for doing
that.
Hi.
Yeah, so my question is, were you happy with the message of Tiger King and the way that it turned out?
I would say that I see you have a giant cat there looming over your shoulder. I can do that too, by the way.
I just have a poodle. That's not as exciting.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest, true crime, I don't really care about the true crime aspects of it. Were less interesting to me. I did work on, I focused more on the first half of the series, but I did work on every section more or less. Maybe not. Yeah, I would say maybe not so much. Episode 6 is the one I probably worked on the least, but there's still giant, big scenes in there. I would say that's my feeling is I wish it could have gotten more information, good information. And I think we realize now from some of the reactions to it that there were things that confused people that I think we would have realized if we had more time and more the ability to do test screenings. One of the things I learned on this project is when you have a 7-part series and it's running like, in the rough cut form, like 6 hours, you can't just it's not like a documentary where you get some friends together and you watch it and get comments. It was hard to get people together, get the comments and watch that, commit to watching the whole damn thing, and then be able to get comments and then make changes. So we really didn't have, unfortunately, the luxury of doing that. We were locked into an air date, which happened to be, it just so happens was during the coronavirus. So I would say there are things that I would have liked to have seen done differently. But in terms of the reaction to it, I'm mixed. I mean, I think the last number I heard was 64 million people have seen this thing. I hope 64 million people aren't being as misogynistic against, Carol Baskin as we see in the world of memes and all that kind of stuff. So I think like anything else in this country, when something becomes a cultural phenomenon, there's a lot of ugly stuff. And I think a lot of that stuff is just unnecessary and, advocating violence and, the whole look, Carol's innocent until proven guilty. And I think the film, shows a story that, we do a deep dive into her whole backstory with her husband. It is an old story that has been around since the 90s. It was like, I think the cover, it was definitely a feature article in People magazine. I think they were on hard copy. So it's a story that's been out there for a long, long time. And we did a deep dive into it. And we actually uncovered more moments of doubt in terms of, like, for example, Kenny Farr reports that Don said, oh, if I get away with this, it'll be the biggest thing I've ever done. Like, that was a previously unreported detail. There were a number of other examples of that. And so, we leave it hanging. She is innocent until proven guilty. That said, there is obviously a lot of circumstantial evidence. And so when you see all that piled on, it does kind of give you, leave you with an impression. But I don't like how it's become kind of this sort of humorous thing to make a violent meme against her. I think that's not something we expected to happen. So when it happened and you just realize, wow, this freight train's moving, it's not something an editor normally has to worry about. Let's put it that way. You don't normally have your thing turn into a cultural phenomenon. So, so I would say, overall, I'm pleased with, I think we did a great job crafting the stories of the people. I think a lot of some of the issues and facts I'm less happy with.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Sarah. So far, so good, other than me kicking myself off of my own webinar.
Thing.
We're just
That's how you roll
right along here.
Yep.
So to kind of switch a little bit over a little bit more in terms of like general workflow questions, Gil's going to come over and ask you a question a little bit about working in Louisville and how telecommuting and telecommunications works.
Gotcha.
All right, Gil, here he is. Let's unmute.
All right.
Gil, you with us? There.
Oh,
Oh,
that was freaky.
living lavish over there, Gil.
I know.
It's a green screen.
How is it done?
Yeah, the best is a video background green screen where you can have like the beach behind you and stuff, and it moves. Yeah. I was curious about. I work in telecom and I'm a film buff. I was wondering about what types of like telecommunications tools or products do you use to work at home and collaborate? And do you do anything that is unique, or at least unique to you?
It's surprisingly low end these days. I mean, I'm talking to you. We use Avid software, which is sort of an industry standard software. It works very well for sharing, especially when you're in a shared environment. In a local shared environment, you can pass cuts back and share the same hard drives and all that kind of stuff. In terms of working remotely, honestly, I just have a little iMac on my desk here and a pretty good internet connection, which is when I did move here, that was one of the things I did check, like, do they have good broadband here? If my wife is watching, I see them pulling up with the delivery. So sorry.
Oh,
don't mean to.
That's good news. That's
I'm just going to say, I can, hey, so yeah, there's nothing terribly fancy. We were using Slack. The edit team was using Slack, which is like not a big, a big fancy thing. And that was a really great tool for us. I had never used it before. I had always heard bad things about Slack. That it's just a nightmare and it haunts you and you end up, it just becomes this albatross on your back. But for us, it was actually really nice because since we're working with a team of editors, and especially for me who's working remotely, but even when I was in the New York office, I used it extensively. I would say, hey, I found a great shot of Joe weed whacking. If anybody needs to show how, mundane his life was, this might be a great thing to show. Or so it would be a good way to just throw things out there. Or I would say, I really need to try to show an example of Joe being mean to his employees. And I know we used this in episode 5. Did anybody have any outtakes? Because the amount of footage was so big and so huge that there was no way any one of us could have watched everything.
I had a follow-up question that comes from reading the article in the paper last week. Sure. What specifically makes Crescent Hill hipper than Brooklyn for you?
So it wasn't it wasn't totally. The quote was, of course, shortened a little bit. The full quote was, we lived in actually a fairly quiet residential section in Brooklyn. And so compared to where I was living in Brooklyn, Crescent Hill is much hipper. But that said, I find it's just that it's a walkable neighborhood.
Yeah.
When we're open, you've got all these great places to go get a drink. They do the thing every last Friday of every month where they Frankfurt, the trolley thing is a lot of fun. And it's just people, like, all the houses are cool to look at. Like, I mean, we have dogs, and so we're always walking around and trying to find a different block to walk down. And it's just kind of cool to see what people, that's cool. Like, people do their garden stuff. And I was just sort of over Brooklyn, I was just sort of like, it's so expensive. And honestly, our neighborhood where we lived was like, you'd look up and at 9:30 at night, all the lights are off. It was just kind of a quiet, sort of boring. It's a neighborhood called Windsor Terrace, which is near Park Slope. Park Slope's a little bit more happening, but our particular little area was we just found kind of boring. So that's kind of what I was talking about.
Cool. Yeah, I'm a fan as well.
Cool. Yeah, I'm digging it.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, so switching up to, we're gonna have two quick questions that are a little bit more on the overall process of editing. So I'm gonna have Derek come over here and join us. Here we go, Derek. Let's see, come on over. Maybe I'm not gonna sing anymore. Or maybe it's just starting. All right, Derek. You with us?
Derek with a C, paging Derek with a C.
Okay, we're giving a couple more seconds, and then otherwise I'm going to come over to Eric. All right. Hey, Derek, go ahead and wave at me if you see us and you come back over here. Let me go ahead and bring Eric over. All right. Okay, and Eric, are you with us?
Hello.
Hey.
Hi. How are you?
I'm hanging in there.
It's great to see you. So what's your question?
Question about what's your default dissolve size, but I actually have a real question.
Okay.
Sliding it in there. Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, we've all been talking about Tiger King. I'm much more interested in Fog of War. That was such a fantastic project. What was how was getting on that project like, and working with Errol Morrison? How does that compare to a project like Tiger King?
Sure. Well, to answer your first question, star wipe, usually 24 or 34, 30 frames in there. So Fog of War is kind of, I mean, it's funny in that it kind of evolved in a similar way, which is that the project was originally, Errol was doing a TV show called First Person. And, oh, good, you have a cat in the background. Everybody should have a cat in the background. And so the first season of that show, which nobody saw, but was quite good, was really about quirky people who were obsessed with strange things, like a guy who was into the, finding the, at the time, nobody had found an example of a living giant squid. Somebody else was a pen pal to the Unabomber. So they were like, sort of more typical Errol Morris, quirky people doing quirky things stuff. And then he got bored of that. Errol gets bored. He has a short attention span with that stuff. And he gets bored of doing the same thing for too long. So he started to try to do more pithy interviews. And he got Robert McNamara, and McNamara was confused. He thought it was part of his book tour. And so he sat down in this bizarre set and expected to do like a 20-minute, thing with somebody who hadn't read the book. Errol's not that person. Errol interviewed him for 3 or 4 hours, developed a bunch of questions, stayed up all night, read 2 books about the firebombing of Tokyo, and came in the next day and did another 4 hours, and then did that a couple days in a row. And so McNamara realized, oh my God, this guy actually has real questions about real topics. And so we took that and we basically developed it. We knew, sort of like Tiger King in the early days, we developed it into sort of the best story that we could, but we also knew that we had giant gaping holes. And so I think we got it down to like about a 40-minute, pretty compelling, interesting cut. And then it was shopped around. And I think that's when I went on, very much like Tiger King, I believe I went on hiatus at that moment. But Errol brought back McNamara a couple more times. I think he did a total of 3 big interviews, and then I think he did some pickups, pickups on the end that might have been audio only. But that's kind of how it evolved. And to be honest, when I first started working on it, I thought, oh, there's this old guy, and he has like a lot of phlegm in his throat, and are people going to want to watch this? And then 9/11 hit, and we suddenly realized, with a lot of like the 6 months after 9/11, we realized, oh my God, this film has all of a sudden become much more relevant than it probably was before this all happened. And so it became one of these things that it kind of like Tiger King. It kind of like took on a life of its own, because we realized all of a sudden the words McNamara was saying had a relevance to us today, where it really didn't. And so that's kind of the short story. I know I don't want to eat up all the time here, but that's kind of like the short story. And Errol's, to answer your question, and he's a crazy, super smart, loves telling stories. It's, there were definitely days where we didn't get a lot done, but I was never bored. That's for sure. He, and he'll have bouts of, like every filmmaker, of self-doubt and want to tear something up. And we certainly struggled with the structure of Fog of War as well. There was a lot of experimenting, and Karen Schmier, who's no longer with us, but was a wonderful editor, was really, very, very, very instrumental in kind of helping with the final structure that came in there with the chapter headings. So that's the short answer.
Thanks for your question, Eric. And I appreciate you actually changing your question up and having a Fog of War question, because that's quite a film. So thanks so much for being on here with us.
Great, thank you.
So I am going to actually have one more attendee join us with a question, and we'll be a little brief with that. So we're going to, not my direction to you, but to our asker, if we can be pretty to the point on it. Everybody's been doing a great job so far. So here we go. And not that Shepard is long-winded at all. He is always succinct and fantastic. Let's see if he's coming over to join us. All right, come on over. Where are you? There we go.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. He is, there he is. All right.
There we go. Connecting to audio.
Hi, love. Let's see.
Working.
There we go. All right,
That's
it's
it.
all you.
Okay, awesome. Sorry, I had some trouble.
Shepard's here's Doug. Go for it,
No
babe.
worries.
Thanks for taking my question.
Sure.
I've been asked part of my question earlier, and I loved your answer. I'm more curious, I guess, about Fahrenheit 11/9 and working with Michael Moore. With your role as an editor, working with a director with a vision like that, like, what does it look like for you? Like, are you following a script? Are you really bringing ideas to the director and producers for a narrative based on the mountain of material you're sorting through on a documentary like that? That's my question.
So, yeah, I mean, that's a complicated one to answer, but because Michael knew what he wanted the film to do, but he was really struggling with how to do it. And also, Michael's not the spring chicken he used to be, and he can't run around the way he used to. He's got some mobility issues, and so we were kind of constructing. I mean, if you watch the film, we were kind of constructing a lot of it was kind of working with a script, working with sections in scripts, but it was the film is, it's a challenging film. I mean, I feel like what it did is it mostly gave you a feeling more than really any specific information or any conclusions or solutions. It was something I think Michael always wanted to convey. And I think when you watch it, it is like a slow panic, like it's an unpleasant film to watch. It's like, especially the last 10 minutes are just like really intense. There's an uplifting part, you know, in the middle where we sort of meet the, you know, those maverick, you know, folks running for office, and we had AOC in it, which was just a lark that they happened to be filming with her. And so we do have that kind of uplifting section in the middle, but it's, you know, even though there's humor in it, it's pretty dark and bleak material. And I think it was, you know, it was really just us trying to help him get there. So we would just cut scenes and scenes and scenes, and it was a really, really, really difficult project. But I think what we had is we had kind of this giant, you know, bulletin board with index cards, and Michael would stare at it, and we would all go in and have big meetings. And I think I would say Michael was very, very involved on the macro stage, really like, what's the flow of this and where is this going to go? And here's what I want to say here. But I will say that a lot of the smaller stuff we're just doing, and he didn't even have time to really even comment on it. I know he wasn't necessarily, you know, 100% happy with everything or a joke or whatever. So we didn't have the luxury of like really getting into every fine detail. But I think that he had that kind of overall arching structure, and he, you know, would sit and write, and he would record voiceover, and he would vamp a lot of times. So he would have a script he would go by, but a lot of times he would vamp, and we would take those recordings. And sometimes the producers would, you know, whisper in our ear like, oh, you should try this or try that. But that's how it was kind of done. We would take that voiceover and then like kind of fix it into existing scenes. But I don't know that I would probably take a whole hour to kind of like describe the process a bit more, but it was pretty, I would say, fairly chaotic, and a lot of depressed people pacing in rooms, because it was, you know, it's dark times, and we were, you know, not totally sure if we were kicking it out of the park at the time. You know, it was like, we sort of felt like, God, maybe Michael has met his match in this man. He is just Teflon Don. It's like, how do you use reason or logic to fight him? It just doesn't seem to work. So, yeah, it would probably take a whole episode to kind of download on that. But yeah, really difficult, very intense, very exhausting project.
Well, and I'm sure as the process went, it was the story was still changing.
Yeah, I mean, we repressed a lot of it, I think, but yeah, it was, you know, it was just really, we were just so under the gun, and in terms of like an absolute drop dead deadline that we had to hit for the Toronto Film Festival. And so I think at a certain point we were just like, we're doing this when this has got to go here. And one thing Michael's really good at is he's really good at making connective tissue. So you might have two scenes that were just like, oh, how are those going together? And he would figure out some way, a lot of times on the fly. But if we gave him that mission, like, dude, you need to figure out like, well, how do we get from here to here? He could figure out ways to do it. So that's one of his skills, I think, is kind of the connective tissue that sometimes just wasn't organic, you know. So he was helpful, you know, really good at that, I'd say.
Thank you for your question.
Awesome. Thank you.
Jeff.
Sure.
Appreciate having
Thanks,
you on.
Susie.
So Doug, I'm going to start wrapping us up here. I think a question I should ask is, you know, what's going on? We saw that quick follow-up episode for Tiger King. Is anything else in the works in terms of your team with the project?
I can't discuss that.
Well,
that's an answer.
That was an answer.
Obviously, it was a big hit. Obviously, Netflix was anxious to slap together that episode 8 of which I have, you know, not a super high opinion, but we had nothing to do with it. It was just something that it just kind of did on their own. So, you know, I think they have a big hit on their hands, and so it wouldn't surprise me if they wanted to try to do something to follow up. But mum is the word.
Copy that.
Used to be, you know, Grease used to be the word. Now it's mum.
Now it's mum.
Mum.
Just,
yeah, it's the word.
So one piece of advice that you might have, if we have burgeoning filmmakers here that are tuning in, or people that are interested in editing, do you have any suggestions of what they might be able to do to gain some more skills when it comes to editing?
All right, so here's where I become an old fart. It is so much easier now. When I was a kid,
When I
was a kid, we would walk to the cinema for a mile just to see a newsreel. No, it was just, we were shooting on, I mean, I'm old enough that we was shot on film, 16 millimeter and Super 8, and you had these horrible, Super 8, you're cutting the sound on the film, so you couldn't even like do an L cut or anything like that. And it was really an expensive hobby. I was doing it since I was a kid. It was expensive as heck, and really hard to kind of execute what you want. And I just think you learn by doing. One of my first sort of paid editing gigs, I think my first paid editing gig was actually this HBO show. Like, how the heck did I get an HBO show? I got an HBO show because it was a super low budget thing called hardcore TV. Not a great shining example of anything. But the director knew, I need some young people that I can just abuse into the ground and just like make them work crazy long hours. And we're like, I'll do it. So I really, really, really feel strongly you learn by doing. And it is, with phones and all this crap, you can do it. It's so much easier. So you kind of have no excuse not to be a brilliant filmmaker, because, you just have to learn to be, develop a passion for a story and just do it. That is absolutely my advice, because all the technical stuff is so much easier to deal with. It is good to get a lavalier mic. I would say you can have crappy picture, but having crappy sound and crappy pictures. So that's one little investment. If you're shooting a movie on your phone, you pick up one of those little $200 like sound recording dealios that you can get a good sound on your subject, because it's surprising how big a difference that makes.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the things I've noticed about all these Zoom sessions. It's like, yeah, it's great, but it's like, it's like everybody sounds like they're in a hollow, in a church hall bathroom or something. You're not used to hearing that on TV. So that would be my number one piece of advice, is just to do it. And I mean, I know it sounds basic, but I really don't think I mean, if you're lucky enough to work with folks, where you can learn, yeah, by all means, go nuts. But if you're kind of on your own, or an environment where you can't necessarily do that, I think it's amazing. I really hope that we, these people growing up with all this stuff can just be like the most amazing filmmakers, because there's no damn excuse.
Yeah, there's no excuse, right? I'm
Yeah,
I don't have to go check this out of any kind of equipment facility, or drive up in traffic to LA and get that. I'm like, no, right here. Kentucky.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you so much for joining us tonight, and also, for coming to our networking social. For those of you that have not been there, when we have them again, and we can be a little less distanced and isolated from one another, hopefully we can have one of those on the books. And not guaranteeing that Doug will be there, but people like Doug are there. We can all connect. We can all come together, talk about craft, and continue the conversation about being content creators in Louisville, Kentucky. We have another film forum coming up on May 20th with Bradford Young, who is an Academy Award nominated filmmaker from Louisville, Kentucky. And he did Selma and Solo, and Academy nominated for Arrival. So he'll be with us on May 20th. And we also implore everybody who's watching, even if it's $5 or anything that you can afford or spare, at LouisvilleFilmSociety.org, we do have a donate button at the top of our website. And that's really helping us continue operations during these incredibly unique times where a lot of funding and our events are down. So we really, really appreciate you all supporting us any way that you can. And Doug, thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing your pearls of wisdom with everybody.
My pleasure. I'm looking forward to having a beer with everybody.
Can't wait.
A cold frosty beer.
How is that going to work? Like, will we just like lift the masks? Will we have special straws? Who knows?
I'm not sure. Maybe we can absorb it through our skin. It's possible.
Beer patches.
You dip your finger in and Just
We'll work on it. Osmosis.
we'll get our
Um,
best
but-
scientists working on that.
Exactly. Everybody, that's your project. Edit
Yep.
something because you can on your
Right.
phone or on your computer, and then also figure out how we can keep drinking with masks on.
That's true. That's it.
All right. You take care, and thanks
All right.
everybody so much for tuning in.
Thanks so much, everybody. And Susie, be
Take
well.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.